Welcome to Talking Supply Chain. In each episode, top supply chain industry professionals and the nation's top thought leaders join host Brian Strait and share their unique insights to help supply chain managers stay one step ahead of their competition. This is Talking Supply Chain. Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Talking Supply Chain podcast. I'm your host, Brian Strait, and today we are going to tackle procurement intelligence in the retail sector. I'm being joined by Dave Pennino, CEO of LogicSource. LogicSource manages over $100 billion in spending for top brands, including Bath & Body Works, Titleist, and Subway. Dave, welcome to the Talking Supply Chain podcast. It's great to have you.
Thank you for giving me the time.
To get started, we're going to dive into some of the issues in the space here. But to get started, why don't you tell the audience a little bit about yourself and LogicSource and what you guys do?
Sure. A little bit about myself. I grew up in Connecticut, right down the road from you. And professionally, I grew up at Gartner, which was the world's leading IT advisory firm. And over the years in high tech at Gartner and Scient and a few other firms, I became fascinated with, simply put, buying things and in how we might be able to build a tech-enabled professional services firm to help institutions buy better, drive profit improvement, reduce supply chain risk, supply chain continuity risk, et cetera. And that's what we set out to do. And about 2009, I partnered with Bain Capital Ventures out of Boston and produced a business plan to create a utility, if you will, for buying, procurement, sourcing, et cetera. And for the last 15 years, we've been building and scaling that business. And we focused originally in retail. So our biggest industry by far is retail and what I would call owned retail within the CPG world. And what they all have in common is they buy a ton of stuff to, basically sell their products through physical space, internet, you name it. And it's been a wild ride.
Yep. And then how about LogicSource? How did that come about?
So yeah, like I said, we started the firm from scratch with Bain Capital. Brought them, 17 PowerPoint slides with our business plan, and they funded us from an idea which was unique for Bain Capital Ventures, and gave us our seed capital and our Series A to go scale the business. And we actually, our first client ever was Michael's Stores down in Dallas, Texas. They're still a client today. And we've kind of never looked back. Today we've got, we run over 36 procurement departments for consumer-facing businesses, retail, CPG, et cetera. As you mentioned in the opening, we have about 100 billion of spend running through the firm, and that's in categories like marketing, store development, facilities, IT, distribution, logistics, packaging, et cetera, et cetera. And that's kind of how we got this going.
Yeah, my wife loves Michael's, by the way. So
yeah, they're great. They're a great business, and I've got 4 daughters, and we have a lot of fun wandering around Michael's and figuring out what our crafts are going to be in any given weekend.
Yeah, I think I'm probably like a lot of husbands, though. Unfortunately, I kind of stand there and look dumb as she's walking around looking at things, and I'm like, I don't even know what this stuff is. So.
Yeah, well, I have a lot of fun with having clients like Lululemon and Gap and Bath and Body and Titleist, and we can pick which ones my daughters get excited about and which ones I get excited about.
Well, at least in either way, at least you have an excited customer, right?
Exactly.
So, we're going to get into some procurement strategies to managing spending in a little bit. But in order to get started, we're kind of talking about retail here today. Can you talk about what the current retail landscape is in regards to spending? So, we've seen, as everybody knows, and certainly those in the retail industry have gone through so many ups and downs the past decade or so with the rise of e-commerce. Then we had the COVID disruptions, we had product shortages, inflation in the last couple of years. So what are you kind of hearing from your clients on the state of the market and where they see it at the moment?
Yeah, look, it's been a wild ride, right? So if you think back to COVID, you had your essential retailers. I had clients like Big Lots, for example, who just absolutely crushed it during COVID because they were open, they were essential, and everybody was forced to stay home. So, they were buying outdoor furniture and patio furniture. They were buying couches. They were redoing their bathrooms. They spent all their disposable income, and let's face it, some money the government gave them, on their homes. And those businesses thrived. The smart ones, hit a lot of their acorns in the oak tree for the day they knew was coming, which was the consumer was going to get back outside. And, you look at the last couple of years, and everybody that wanted a couch bought one. So they spent all their money on travel. and experiences since COVID. So the winners and losers have been really interesting. Recent news, Big Lots is contemplating a sale or a bankruptcy, and they were the one of the darlings during COVID. And then there's brands like Lulu who have thrived in good and bad times, because their product is, they've got a market, and they're at an echelon within that market where they can survive ups and downs, and everybody wants their stuff. So it's interesting to see where the winners and losers are. I think we're heading back into an economic situation where if you're big and strong, you're going to be okay. If you're luxury, you're going to be okay. If you're discount, you're probably going to be okay. The middle is where I'd get worried right now.
Yeah.
Because I think consumer spending is dropping. Discretional income is dropping. And I think that's where you're seeing the soft spots.
Yeah, it's funny. My family, when I was growing up, had a children's clothing store, retail store. I think couple of stores. Wasn't big, just a couple of businesses, and
Sure.
they kind of served that middle to upper middle class clientele, right? Not the wealthy, but not the lower income either. And when the 2008 recession came around, it really hurt them bad, because
Yeah.
those are the people that cut back the most, I think, at least in that time. And we're kind of seeing something similar here, maybe.
Yeah, I think so. And we were talking about with home furnishings, for example. First, you had everybody bought everything they wanted during COVID, and
Yeah.
now with interest rates the way they are, new home starts down. Transactions in terms of real estate down. There's less people moving and buying stuff, right? So those sectors you got to watch out for.
Yeah.
I think that people are keeping cars longer. So whether it's another segment of retail, automotive retail. I think there's a lot of people that are going to fix the old car and not buy a new one because interest rates are so high. So that's going to help repair shops and tire shops. And we've got a couple clients in the retail tire business, for example. But your new car dealerships are going to hurt a little bit. So I think it's going to be interesting times coming ahead, and I don't think it's going to stabilize until after the election. And I won't get into who I think might win and what that's going to mean, but I don't think it's going to stabilize till after that.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, a lot of people I talk to, the kind of because both sides, both parties in this country seem to have very different views of where we're going. So I think everybody's kind of in a holding pattern at this point to see where we end up and how to make their adjustments accordingly.
Absolutely.
Um, all these things you just talked about obviously creates more focus on spending, and retailers. So with all these changes that have taken place, has that focused the retailers' attention more on procurement spending specifically?
100%. Look, COVID was horrible for a lot of obvious reasons. There were some bright spots that came out of the focus it brought us. I think that sourcing and procurement was not viewed as a critical function within the enterprise in many, many corporations. Supply chain, core product, merchandising, and retail has always been a core focus. But when it came to things like buying masks that you didn't know you needed to buy, hand sanitizer you never contemplated, blast screens for registers that you never had to buy before. All this stuff, it really shined a light on the need for professional sourcing and procurement capability. And then you had really big supply chain continuity issues. I mean, during COVID, you had things like shipping containers going from $7,000 a container to $57,000 a container overnight, and having to figure out how you were going to get your product into market without being able to pass that increase on to your customers, because some of the products you couldn't. Take a client like Bic, pens, lighters, etc. You can't pass that price along on a plastic pen. There's no way you can. So, realizing how important sourcing and procurement was to not just saving money, but just staying open. I think COVID really shed a light on this area, and I've seen it in terms of compensation. Massive increase in procurement compensation, increase in titling, increase in where they're reporting within the enterprise. And you're also seeing in the university systems, back in the day, someone like Ohio State or University of Arizona had some of the only supply chain majors, in the country. Now everybody has one. So I think, it's definitely an area where everybody's focused.
Yeah. So what, now that they've really focused on this, so what changes have you seen in spending habits when it comes to procurement? Are you seeing companies approach this differently?
Absolutely. especially in the world we live in indirect procurement, you have to manage your spend extremely aggressively. Payment terms are becoming a bigger and bigger deal because interest rates are high. The cost of money is high.
Yep.
You have to manage your spend to make sure your dollar's going further. Marketeers, for example, aren't going to get increases. They have to make their budget go further. IT execs that want to create more innovation, they're not going to get more money. They have to make their budget go further. And then when you take into account the increase in spending around e-com, I think back before COVID, internet commerce was like 11% of retail. It's got to be pushing up on 35-40% of retail now. The expenditures that come along with, the e-commerce, shipping, warehousing, freight, et cetera, they've got to pay for that somehow, and they've got to be cost conscious to be able to get there.
Yeah.
And look, consumer, as we said, consumer spending, they're watching their dollars, so they have to be able to lower the cost of operating.
So as they do that, as these retailers look and say, hey, we're gonna really put a spotlight here on what we're spending and where we're doing it. Are there any particular areas they're looking at in particular for cost reduction, or is it an across the board, everything? I mean, I guess some areas probably are easier to make reductions than others. So where are they focused in that aspect?
Yeah, I think the smart ones are really doing top-down analysis of their spend. And they're not just looking at what they buy, but they're looking at why they buy it. Demand management is probably the single biggest lever they can pull. The best way to save money is stop spending it. So the smart CFOs, and this is almost always driven by the CFO's office, are looking top down at the organization. What do we buy? Who do we buy it from? Why do we buy it? Who buys it? How do we buy it? And they're creating top-down initiatives to, reduce cost, change the way they utilize the things they buy so that they can drive efficiency. And it all starts with data. And I'd say that the most common finding for us as we go into organizations for a living, and the first thing we do is look at spend, is organizations really struggle to get their hands on their data and their contracts. And I think that's been a big aha for our CFOs over the last several years.
So as they do that, how are they doing that? I mean, is this just a matter of collecting data and then and analyze it? I mean, what role? How are they actually getting to this data and getting the understanding as to what this data is telling them and where they need to go?
So I think there's a couple there. There's the how is really, there's three different ways they get at it. They get at it internally. So they build the capability, the muscle and the capability internally. And you'll see this in the big guys. So in retail, right, the Walmarts, the Targets, Kroger's, these kind of folks, they have really robust supply chain capability for direct and indirect procurement. They're staffed appropriately. Their data is at their fingertips with really good source to pay systems. And they're even they have commodity desks and they're buying futures. I mean, the big guys have been doing this for years. The challenge is for the smaller folks. They don't have the capacity to do it internally. If you just think about your average retail store, if you mentally kind of close your eyes and think about all the categories in that store, there's music playing, there's a credit card processing machine, there's flooring, there's lighting, there's mannequins, there's hangers, there's hang tags, there's a dumpster out back, somebody comes to pick up the cash, there's snow removal, there's HVAC repair. There's thousands of categories just in one store.
Yeah.
Let alone the corporation and the distribution centers and all that sort of stuff. So trying to build that in-house, if you're a $1 to $15 billion retailer, is daunting. So the big guys and gals get at it with their internal teams, and they always use the consulting firms. The $1 to $20 billion folks and below $1 billion, they're relying on third parties. They're either using consulting firms, group purchasing organizations,
Yeah.
folks like us that are a hybrid of, a retained professional services firm, a consulting firm, a technology firm, and they're getting at it with those folks to help them get their hands on the data, analyze that spend data, and figure out ways to reduce cost.
Yep. You mentioned two things, one in there and one earlier. You talked about indirect spending earlier, and then in that answer, obviously, you just talked about the vast number of things that these organizations are buying. And we've seen research that indirect spending, that most companies don't have any idea what they're doing with indirect spending, right? Let's put it simply. They don't have the insight. large companies could be spending tens of millions of dollars extra in
Oh yeah.
indirect spending. I mean, and it's, I think it even goes down to, like, you talk about a retail company that has 100 stores. Each store may be buying their cleaning supplies for the bathroom separately. I mean,
Correct.
it can go down that. So I assume that in retail, indirect spending, like other businesses, still a big concern. How can that be addressed? What can be done from a retail perspective on that to rein that in a little bit?
So I'd say first and foremost, it's good to understand the size of the prize. So I've been doing this for 15 years in retail. 20% of revenue, plus or minus 1%, 19 to 21% of revenue will be your spend in indirect.
Yeah.
All right. So if you're a billion-dollar retailer, you're going to spend about $200 million in indirect. That's marketing, packaging, distribution, logistics, corporate services, et cetera, et cetera. You should be able to drive anywhere between sort of 6 to 16%, depending on the category, cost reduction within that spend. So every CFO of every retailer has to have a strategy and a current strategy for exactly how they're going to drive that efficiency. So if they don't, they have to. And if it's old, you have to update it, because the second big thing so one, you have to understand the size of the prize. 20% of revenue is the size of the prize. If I'm wrong, it's 1 or 2% in either direction. You have to have a strategy for it. And I can't tell you how many CFOs I meet that are like, yeah, 3 years ago, a consulting firm did it. That's too long ago. Because the second big thing is indirect procurement, like the stock market, moves. It moves every day. The cost of a pallet, the cost of a catalog, the cost of credit card processing, the cost of snow removal, it moves. And you have to work that spend. So
Yeah.
most in-house procurement departments only have the bandwidth to do a few categories a year. One of my CPOs said to me once, I thought this was great. He said, indirect procurement is like remodeling an antique house. Nobody's got the money to do it all at once. So they start with the kitchen, they go to the bathroom, they get to the master bedroom. By the time they're done, they have to start over again. And it's the same way in indirect. You might do a waste management RFP every 3 years. You might renegotiate your credit card processing contract with Chase Payment Tech or Fiserv every 3 years. The market moves 3 months after you did that deal. So you have to find the capacity internally or through a third party to constantly manage that spend. Imagine if your family's savings were with a private wealth manager that only looked at your finances every 3 years. You'd be furious. And
Yeah.
that's what they do with indirect spend expenditures within these corporations.
That house example is great. I love that, because the house I live in is 224 years old, believe it or not.
Then you
And
get it.
we get it. It's like, makes perfect sense to me, because things that we renovated when we first bought the house need to be renovated again. I still haven't finished the first round of renovations that I wanted to do. So
100%. And by the way, indirect procurement is very analogous to the family, right? So we all know you live in Connecticut, right? So you probably pay oil heat. So you probably know what your oil bill is in aggregate, but you probably don't remember what you're paying per gallon. You
yeah,
know, you probably know what you're paying for your mortgage and your insurance, but do you have any idea what you pay per push for snow removal? That kind of stuff. And indirect procurement it's like the credit card bill of the corporation. It's all the stuff that
yeah,
people buy that it's really hard to manage, and you need a strategy.
yeah. Want to shift just a little bit, get into product shortages and the impact that's had. Obviously, since COVID, we saw a lot of product shortages with businesses. We've seen a lot of geopolitical concerns among businesses. And as a result, businesses are really trying to diversify supply chains. I assume that retailers are doing the same thing, assuming they can get their products from multiple countries or multiple suppliers. So how is that changing the pressure that's being put on procurement departments as these supplier bases get bigger and bigger and bigger?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that's predominantly a merchandising issue, and I live in indirect procurement. I think I deal with predominantly very healthy retailers, and I'm not seeing a substantial issue in fulfilling requirements in indirect procurement for
Okay.
healthy retail. I do see unhealthy retail struggling to get product in the stores, and all you have to do is go out and visit some of these folks, and you'll see whose shelves are empty and whose are full. What I am seeing is, we, like I said, we have very healthy retailers like Tractor Supply and, Lululemon. They're getting priority because of their cash position, because of their payment terms. They're going to be first in line for products and services as it pertains to indirect. On the merchandising side, I think the same holds true. The folks that are giving up market share are having trouble filling their shelves because, suppliers are prioritizing the healthy folks and they're making bets on who they think survives.
Yeah. So I mean, so maybe my next question then, it maybe isn't as relevant possibly then, but as supply chains become more diverse, is volume, you might be losing volume pricing power, right? That you used to get. I don't know how that's playing out in the indirect space. Are you seeing any of that taking hold at all, where companies are
Yeah,
losing some pricing power?
definitely, especially again, companies that are giving up market share. So if you are a shrinking retailer, you're starting to trade on past volumes, and your suppliers are saying, "Look, I got to raise price
Mhm.
because you're buying less than you were, and there's been inflationary factors that have actually increased my cost of operating. Your price needs to go up." Which is why you have to have a strategy for every single category within direct so you don't get caught with your pants down. We're seeing it a lot in software, for example. So I'm directionally correct. I haven't checked in the last couple of weeks, but in 2023, there was over 30 SaaS software companies that were publicly traded, growing over 30% a year. In 2024, last I checked, there were three.
Huh.
So SaaS software companies are putting through increases because they're not able to sell top line, so they're increasing on the bottom line. So if you don't have a procurement team that's watching those SaaS contracts and those evergreens and those auto renewals, you're going to get increases. And if you're not a big player and a really healthy player who can battle those off, and maybe your spend's declining, your costs are going to go up.
Yeah. Huh. Interesting. You mentioned SaaS there. You touched on technology a little bit throughout the discussion. We got time for, I think, about one question or so left. I want to ask you about the technology component of this.
Sure.
So what, as far as what technology is being used today, what tech do you see as being most effective in managing spending? And because I always like to ask these questions too, what do you see on the horizon? Do you see anything coming on the horizon that is going to fundamentally change the procurement space?
So yeah, that's a great question. So look, I think that this is the age-old adage that you can't manage what you can't see.
Yeah.
So the single biggest thing you need to solve in procurement as it pertains to automation or technology is spend visibility. You have to be able to see in one place, not static like Excel, but a living, breathing spend cube. What do I buy? Who do I buy it from? Why do I buy it? Who buys it, right? You have to be able to get that data visualization right. So spend analytics tools are a critical expenditure. You have to have a procure to pay system in place so that you're buying off POs, et cetera. I can't tell you how many companies I go into that go to great pains to put pricing in place and payment terms in place and then don't buy off it because they don't have a closed loop procure to pay solution. Contract management's another one. It is shocking to me how few organizations can put their hands on their contracts, let alone are they good contracts, but can they actually put their hands on them? What are our terms with that key supplier? What are our SLAs? What are our renewal clauses? And they end up triggering auto renewals and all these sorts of things because they can't put their hands on their contracts. And COVID amplified the problem because they're all over the place now. They're in people's home offices. They're in DocuSign. They're in Adobe Sign. So
Yeah.
you have to have your hands on your contracts. What's going to come out and change the space? I mean, people like me and my company are spending a lot of money on AI, which you hear about a lot. But let me tell you the so what of AI in our business. Everybody and their brother has an AI strategy. What AI is going to do for a business like ours is it's going to weaponize benchmarks. It's going to weaponize that 100 billion of spend data I have that's growing at 30 billion a year. So I'm going to be able to start pushing benchmarks into those spend cubes I said are so critical.
Mhm.
And pushing contract terms into those contract databases I said are so critical. So we're going to collapse the time it takes to identify the savings areas and be able to deliver against them much quick in a more quick manner than we were a couple years ago.
I thank you for mentioning AI. I can't tell you how many conversations I have these days that don't include AI because it's very few. Uh, I'm glad you were able to get AI in,
Yeah.
but obviously,
Well, but
I
by
know.
the way, most of them are cloud fairyland,
Yeah,
right? AI also creates a massive security risk if it's not done right because you're putting data into an open platform. So you got to really watch what you're doing. But AI used properly is going to be a game changer in this space.
yeah, no, I agree, and I've talked to a lot of others that say procurement's a great application for AI, and to use it. But I also had somebody tell me it's like, well, every not speaking about procurement companies, but he says, well, it used to be every company said they were a data company. Now every company says they're an AI company. But
Exactly. It's funny. One of my clients, I'll leave you with this. One of my clients said to me once about we own a 5 module tech stack that automates the things I talked about: contract management, data
yeah,
analytics, procure to pay. And but we also buy for a living. We run 36, 37 procurement departments, and we have all this data running through our firm. And one of my clients said to me once is someone said their software was highly configurable. And the client said to me, he goes, I finally figured out what highly configurable means. It means it's empty. There's nothing in. So the AI is cute. If you don't have any data, there's nothing you're using artificial intelligence to automate.
yeah.
It all starts and ends with data. You have to master your data, and then you can use systems and tools and AI to do cool things.
Yeah, and make sure. I mean, I always say this too, and I'm not obviously other people do too, but just make sure the data is good data. Right? I mean, you don't want
100%,
AI.
or it's
You don't
garbage in,
want
garbage out.
Yeah, you don't want AI making a recommendation 3 years from now on data that was incorrect today because that's just going to amplify that incorrect decision. Further. So,
Agreed?
David, thank you so much for the time. Great conversation. Appreciate it.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to meet you, and thank you for the time.
Yeah. You want to, and for anybody out there listening, they want to learn more about you, your company, whatever. Is there a good way for them maybe to get in touch with you guys?
Absolutely. So LogicSource is www.logicsource, all one word, just like it sounds, LogicSource.com. Our technology business is One Market, ONE Market.com. And we're in Westport, Connecticut, our headquarters. We're all over the United States. And you can also just hit me on LinkedIn. Really appreciate everybody listening.
Great. And perhaps someday we can connect in person here in
Oh, I'd
Connecticut
love to
here.
do that.
So connect for lunch one day. Appreciate it. I want to thank my guest today, Dave Pennino, CEO of LogicSource, for sharing his thoughts and insights with us. I want to extend a special thank you to all of you out there that have taken time out of your day to listen to us. We greatly appreciate it. A new episode of Talking Supply Chain comes out each Thursday. You can find it on scmr.com or wherever you get your podcasts. So be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Till next time, this is Brian Straight, and you've been listening to Talking Supply Chain. Talking Supply Chain is produced by Supply Chain Management Review and Peerless Media. You can find it on scmr.com, supplychain247.com, iTunes, Google Podcasts, or wherever you find your podcasts. For more information on this topic or to sign up for our weekly newsletter, a print or a digital subscription to our publication, visit scmr.com. We hope you will join us for our next episode. For Supply Chain Management Review, I'm Brian Straight, and thank you for listening.